I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on Spotlight, we're taking a look at an important book. It is called In Sickness and in Health. It's written by a terrific author by the name of Kenneth MacCallum. This Christian-themed self-help guide provides an essential roadmap for caregivers, exploring the emotional and practical aspects of caregiving across the spectrum, from short-term recovery to long-term, life-altering situations. Through the lens of the 7 stages of grief, the author offers not only support, but actionable advice to help caregivers navigate their challenging roles with both faith and resilience. We're delighted to have this talented author join us here today on Spotlight. We thank our team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the spotlight today. And we ask viewers like you to support writers like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his wonderful book. The links are below this interview. Ken, great to see you here today on Spotlight.
Thank you for having me today.
Our pleasure. Tell us what motivated you to write a self-help guide for caregivers.
Well, the way that I started the book is in kind of a roundabout way. I had a wife who had had a brain tumor 7 years prior to when we got married and started having strokes about 10 years after that. And when I started being her caregiver, I was going through the 7 stages of grief. I was going through the shock, denial, the anger, all the way through to the acceptance stage. And then she would, as she was getting better, she'd have something else happen. She'd have a seizure, and I'd have to take her back to the hospital. And we'd go through this all over again, go through the shock. I'd take her down to the hospital, and I'm thinking, I can't believe this is happening to me. So I'm going through the denial stage at that point. And then when I get down to the hospital, I'm thinking, well, if I had only done such and so, she wouldn't have had this happen. Maybe I was part at fault of that at the time, but I wouldn't really be able to say for sure. But then when the doctor would come in, he would say, well, it's a little bit more serious than I thought. Her seizure is going to require her to be in the hospital for several days until we get her health situation stabilized. And when we get her stabilized, we're going to have to change her medications. We're going to have her go into a short-term rehab facility again, go through rehab, change the whole outlook of where we're going with her care. And I was going through this over and over and over again. And as I started looking at this, a lot of people were saying, you ought to write a book about this. And I'm thinking, well, there are a lot of people that have written books on caregiving. You can go to any bookstore, look online and see books on caregiving. But what I didn't see are books that were kind of a self-help guidebook and books that would go through the emotional challenges that you have, the 7 stages of grief, because as you're going through being a caregiver, you're going through each of those 7 stages over and over and over again. When you talk with people initially, telling them that your wife had had a stroke and she's in the hospital, first thing people will say is, you need to call Mike over at this agency. You need to call Susan over here. And you're getting bombarded by a lot of information on people to call, places to go to, agencies to contact. And a lot of that information is information that is given to you by your friends, coworkers, and sometimes family. But the information is not in the right timeline of when you need to contact those people. Sometimes it's bad information, and you have to step back and look at the whole big picture and see where you need to start. And this book is a way to look at that, step back, look at the whole big picture with a lot of faith, a lot of prayer, and a lot of reflection. You can look at how you can start your steps to move forward in taking care of someone. And with the 7 stages of grief, you go through each of those 7 stages. You can't skip over any of them. You start at the shock stage when you're just taking a guess at seeing someone on the ground and you don't know whether they're breathing or not. So they're in that state. You call 911, they come out and they look at your loved one on the ground and they're saying, well, that person had a stroke. You're in shock. Then you go and get them on a gurney, take them down to the hospital, follow behind the ambulance, and you're going through the denial stage. I can't believe this is happening. I can't believe this is happening. You're going through that stage. Then you get down to the hospital and you're thinking, well, maybe it's not as bad as I thought. So now you're in the denial stage and bargaining stage at that point. Then the doctor comes around the corner and says, there's a lot of bleeding on the brain. It's a little more serious than we thought. Then now you're in the anger stage. And then you go slip into the depression stage and move on through these different stages. When you're going through all of those stages, you're also looking at the plan of care that you have moving forward with the person. You have to be creative in your care plan options. You have to be able to think outside the box, and you have to be a strong patient advocate. Those are the 3 paramount characteristics of a caregiver. So when you are going through all of those, there are different times when you need to call agencies, get equipment brought to your house. Once you get your loved one discharged out of the hospital, if they have gone through rehab in a short-term facility, you bring them home, and then you start working with agencies, social workers, caregivers, case managers, all of the different people that are helping you. And with a lot of faith, a lot of prayer, you can get through this. And I have the book written to where I have it set up to show the different steps that you have to go through following the 7 stages of grief.
Well, it's great information that you've just unpacked for us. Certainly when someone's loved one gets a diagnosis that is life-altering, short-term or long-term, your life is turned upside down. Your life is suddenly built around being a caregiver, helping that person sustain life, helping that person regain function. How important is faith? I know it's a big part of your book as well.
Faith is very strong in that one psalm that I use in the book is Psalm 23, where you're saying, yea, though I walk through the valley of shadow of death, I will fear no evil. The word through is the key word in Psalm 23, in that you get through to the other side. You don't get up and down in the valleys and implode and just self-destruct in the middle. You make it to the other side. You're promised that in Psalm 23, that you get through that. And that takes a lot of faith. A lot of times you feel very discouraged. You go through depression when you're going through being a caregiver. That's one of the stages, going through depression. But you get through it. You get to the other side. And then as you get through the depression stage, then you can get into the testing stage and then onto the acceptance stage. And then the acceptance stage is what people today would consider the new normal, because that is how that person is going to be from that point forward. They have a medical condition that has diminished their abilities to be able to function. Sometimes they can't get out of bed. Sometimes they can't tell you what day of the week it is or what month it is.
Mm.
They might not be able to feed themselves or dress themselves. That's the new normal. You have to accept that.
Yeah. Like I said, once that happens, your life is turned upside down. It's harder to accept it though, when it's going up and down, like one day she's better, one day she's worse. The doctors tell you she might improve, or she could be going home. She is normal. You know, that you get a lot of mixed messages when somebody's going through it. So it's hard sometimes to go through those stages of grief without stepping back and sometimes start bargaining and begging and, all of that, right?
Exactly. And when you have your loved one in the hospital, you become very close to the doctors, the
Hmm.
specialists, the nurses. You talk with the people that are in pharmacy because the pharmacist from the hospital will come up to the room and they start asking you questions, and they'll say, well, when were they on this drug? Are they allergic to this particular drug? You become very com- comfortable with a lot of different medicines
Mm.
in the treatment of and care of the person you're taking care of. And sometimes you get to the point where a pharmacist coming up to the room in the hospital can say, are you a pharmacist? No, I'm not a pharmacist. I'm a husband.
Yeah.
And then you have doctors that come into the room and they start asking you questions. How is the level of the baseline of your wife? How is her ability today compared to how it was a month ago? How was it 3 months ago?
Mm.
They ask you more questions than you could possibly ask them.
Yeah.
The questions that you could ask the doctor could be, what's her blood numbers
Mm.
for today? How do they look?
Yeah.
Is she better on the x-ray or the MRI or whatever scan that they did? They can tell you that information, but then the information of how is her baseline, how is her ability to move her arms today compared to how it was 3 months ago?
Right.
How is her speech? Is she clear in conversation? Does she slur words? Does she have expressive aphasia, which is one of the terms that I've learned in where someone has had a stroke? They have expressive aphasia where they can't quite get the word out, but they want to say. Sometimes they say what sounds like in their mind of what the word is, but it doesn't quite come out that way.
Yeah.
So the expressive aphasia. And when you have someone like that, the doctor might ask, how is her level today as opposed to how it was a month ago or 3 months ago? And they ask you more questions than you can ask them.
Yeah. Oh, when your loved one becomes a patient, you become an expert in their condition. It's part of loving that person, no doubt. When you know too much about an illness, that means, unfortunately, that illness is in your family. And we do all, it seems, become experts on these certain aspects of sickness and health. You have written an amazing book, Ken. We appreciate it. The name of the book is In Sickness and Health by Kenneth MacCallum. It is a Christian-themed self-help guide that provides an essential roadmap for caregivers. He gives you advice from somebody who's been there. It's an important book. At one point or another in your life, unfortunately, you will be in this role as well. And you're going to want all the tools accessible to help the person that you love. Ken, thank you so much for joining us here today on Spotlight.
Thank you for having me today.
My pleasure. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time, this time until next time on Spotlight.